Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 28 of my 2020 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Frosty Fairy Friends. So I've stamped my images out on some Nina Solar White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my skin, and for two of the fairies I'm going to use E000, E00, and E11. So I'm laying in some shadow with that E11 right up under their hairline and at the base of their arms and the backs of their legs, and then blending out with that E00, and then I'll save a little bit of space, especially on their faces, for that E000 so they get nice and light. So it really accentuates their features. For the third little fairy, I wanted to try a different skin tone, so I'm using E43, E44, and E77. So I'm going to lay in some of that E77 up under her hairline, and then I'm going to blend that out with the E44, and then I'll use the E43 as my highlight. And I will also color her arms and legs. I just wanted to make sure this was a combination that I liked first before I finished her off. I'm going to use R20 to give all of the fairies some rosy cheeks just by doing a little oval shape right up on their cheekbones under their eyes. And then I'll go back and color in this third fairy's arms and legs like I mentioned. So again, just putting that darkest shadow at the base of the arms and the back of the legs, and then blending out with the mid-tone and finishing with the highlight shade. Then I'm going to take away the E77 and add in the E47 and the E49, and I'm going to color in my house. So I'm using that E49 first, that's my darkest, and I'm laying in some shadow up under the roof line and also at the bottom edge. And then I'm also separating out each of those little planks by doing a little thin line right where the artist drawn line already is. And that is just so that I get a lot of definition in the final result. So I'm just going to continue adding a little bit here and there, kind of separating out each little part so that it gives it a lot of texture and depth. And the color palette for today's card is actually inspired by our current Lawn Fanatics challenge. This time we have a color inspiration challenge, and it's a really pretty cool toned palette. So I'm going to be using that on all of the images today. And if you'd like to check that out, you can, there's a link in the description bar below that'll take you to my blog post where there will be a photo of that, and we would love to have you play along if you're interested. So yeah. So now I'm taking my next darkest color, the E47, and I'm going over the edge of that E49 and pulling that darker color down into the white area so that I get a nice transition from shade to shade. Now I'm not trying to get a perfectly smooth blend just because this is a house made out of a stump, so it's wood texture, so it would be rough and bumpy, and so I don't mind, you know, if there's a little bit of variation there in the coloring. So now I'm coming in with that E44, and I'm going to bring that out even further and cover up most of the white space now, just saving a little bit of room for that E43 so that I get some nice highlighted areas. You know, just you want some variation when it comes to wood grain because everything isn't all smooth and perfect. You know, it's nature. So yeah, I think using these four shades, they just work really well together to create a nice tree stump kind of look. So I'm finishing the little house with that E43, and then I'm actually going to use these shades to color in the first fairy's hair. I wanted her to be a brunette, so I'm going to just use the lightest three shades here, And when I'm doing hair, I always start with my lightest shade, and that way I can build up to the darker colors. So I started with that E43 and laid in where I want my shadows to be. And then I'm going over that with the E44. And then I'm going to come in with that E47 and darken things up even further. Just doing kind of little flicking motions so it also has a little bit of texture to it. And then I'll work my way back down in the reverse with that E44 and then fill in the rest with the E43. I'm also going to make my third fairy a brunette, but for her I wanted her hair to be a bit darker. So I took away the E43 and I'm going to include that E49. So again, I laid in my shadows first with that E44, and now I'm coming in with that E47 and darkening things up. And then I'll come in with that E49 and really lay in some dark shadows, creating a lot of contrast there. And then I'll blend back down in the reverse with that E47, and then I'll finish with the E44. These girls are pretty simple since there's not a lot of hair there to color, but I like to have those 3 shades in there because I think it just adds a little bit of extra realism, I guess, to these really cutesy little images. My middle fairy, I decided to make a blonde, so I'm using E50, E51, and E53 for her. And again, I just started with my lightest shade, that E50, blended all the way up to the E53, and then I worked my way back down with the E51 and then the E50. I went back in and added a few extra streaks with that E53 at the end, and I will later color in the mushroom stem with those shades as well. For the fairy wings, I'm using BG70 and BG72. First, I'm laying down a layer of that BG70 because that BG72 has a lot more color into it. So I just want a little touch of that. And then I'm going to blend that out with the BG70 again. Kind of just gives them a really soft and almost transparent look, I think. Then I'm moving on to my reds, and the red in the inspiration photo is a very cool toned red with a lot of pink in it. So I pulled out R35, R46, and R39. So the R39 is my darkest. So I'm going to start with the fairy in the top left and color in her dress, using that R39 down her back and blending toward the front with the R46, and then using that R35 in the highlight area because it is like a really pinky, like cherry red. And then I'm going to give the other fairies all a little accessory to match, but I'm going to bounce around and do different items for each of them. So I'm doing the third fairy's scarf in this red combo, and then I'll do the second fairy's little earmuffs. I almost called them headphones, which they could be, but I think they're supposed to be earmuffs. So I'm also going to color in the mushroom cap with these shades, but I'll do that off screen. For my next color combo, I'm using some blues. It's B26, B37, and B39. So I'm using that B39 to color in the first fairy's earmuffs. I did her shadow with that shade and then blend it out with the B37, and then I'll fill in with the B26. I wasn't sure that I was loving that combo though, because there wasn't very much depth there. I felt like the shades were just a little too similar. So I'm going to pull in the B23 for the other items. So I'm moving on to the third fairy's little dress, and I'm coloring that in with these shades. I did squeeze in all 4 shades on her dress, but the B26 and the B37 were so similar that you really don't need both of them. So when I go to do the second fairy's little muffler, I'm going to leave off the B26. I just used the B39 and then the B37 and then the B23. I also did the door and the little window box in that same blue combo, and now I'm switching to a different blue combo. I wanted something that was just a bit lighter, so I'm using B41, B52, and B45. So the B45 is my darkest, and then the B52 is what I'm using for the mid-tone, and the B41 is my highlight shade. So I did the first fairy's scarf, and I'm going to do the second fairy's dress. So I'm putting a little shadow up under her head on her neckline, and then under her muffler as well, and then blended down on each of those areas. And then the third little fairy, I'm going to give her the earmuffs. I almost said headphones again. Earmuffs with those same shades. And then I'll also color in the little gift with those markers. Then I'm moving on to kind of a maroon shade. So I'm using RV66, RV69, and RV99. And I'm going to color in the berries on the little branches. And these markers are pretty new to me. I haven't had them that long and I haven't played with them that much, but I really loved how they looked. I think I will definitely be using these again this winter because they're just such a pretty jewel tone. I really love them. So I did the first branch on screen. I'll do the second one off screen just to save you some time. And then I'm moving on to the little white areas and the roof. So I'm using C7, C5, and C3 for the roof. Starting with the C7 as my darkest, I'm going to lay that in from either side, and then also just a little thin line on the bottom edge of the entire roof. And then I'm going to blend that up toward the peak with the C5 on both sides. Just saving a little bit of room there for a highlight shade, and for that I'll use the C3. So I'm just going to fill that in, and then for the little chimney and the stone hearth I'm going to use the C3 as my darkest, and then I'm going to blend that out with the C1, and I just use the two shades on those little areas. I'll use Y11 to add a little glow inside each of the windows so it looks like there's some lights on inside, since this is going to be a nighttime scene. And then I'm going to take BG10 and I'm going to color in a little bit of the white parts at the bottom of their skirts, and then all of the little snow drifts, just adding a little bit to the bottom edge and leaving the rest white. And then I will trim these out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I've cut down a couple pieces of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock with the Lawn Fawn outside and stitch rectangle stackables and the stitch hillside borders. So I'm going to start with the two stitch hillside borders. Those are going to be my snow drifts, but I want to add a little frosty glow to the top edge. So I'm going to sponge on some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink just at the very top of that panel and let that blend off into the white. I just want to basically highlight that top edge with that stitching detail. So I'm going to do that on both of those panels. And then I'll set those aside and work on the main panel. I'm also going to use that tumbled glass in the center of that one. I basically want to create like a little aperture or a vignette. I want the color to be lightest in the center and then get darker and darker as we go toward the outside edges. But with distress oxides, well, distress inks of any kind, you really need to layer on the color. That's how you're going to build it up. So I've moved on to Stormy Sky, and I'm going to bring that in from the outside edges and then stop when I get toward the middle. I want to leave that area with the tumbled glass. I want to leave that nice and light, but I will go back to that tumbled glass and blend, that transition area and kind of just smooth everything out. I'm going to have to work back and forth a few times to get a really nice look. To darken that up even further, I'm going to bring in chipped sapphire. And again, I'm going to blend that from the outside edges. This time I'm kind of using just the side of that blending tool because I don't want to get too much of that dark on the inside edge. I just want to keep it on the outside so you can still see all of that transition area. So I'm coming back in with that stormy sky again. And then I will use the tumbled glass again in the center. I'm just going to work my way back and forth, like I said, until I have a look that I'm happy with. And especially when you're blending on this Bristol, because it has that smooth coating on the outside edge, it really can push that color around. It takes a while for the ink to dry, so you really have a lot of time to play and get things to look the way you want them. So to make things even darker and really create that vignette look, I brought in some black soot on the very, very outside, and just really made that, the black soot, for some reason, it just really pulls things together. And now I'm working my way back down to the lightest, and now I'm going to take some Copic opaque white. I'm going to put a whole bunch of it onto a small acrylic block, and then I will water that down with a tiny bit of water from my sprayer. I'm going to mix that up with an old paintbrush and then flick that all over the background so I get a whole variety of sized droplets. So it really looks like a beautiful snowy sky. And then I also decided to grab some Lawn Fawn liquid stardust. This stuff just creates a really pretty like pearlized shine. So I'm going to mix that up really good, and then I'm going to put a little bit of that onto my acrylic block, and then using that same paintbrush I'm going to splatter that all over the background as well. I'm going to set this aside to dry for a little bit, and while I'm doing that I'm going to stamp my sentiment on the bottom of my snowdrift. This is on the shorter of the two snowdrifts, and I'm doing the Fairy Merry Christmas because I thought it's kind of like a little pun. Instead of Very Merry Christmas, it's Fairy Merry Christmas. So I'm stamping that in Lawn Fawn Juice Box ink to tie in that kind of purple maroonish color. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my Misty. I'm using Moonstone cardstock that I've scored and folded to a standard size card. And then I'm stamping in Forget Me Not ink. I'm using one of those fairies again and some snowflakes and the sentiment that says, "Have a magical holiday season." So now I'm ready to start assembling. The background is not completely dry, so I'm going to be really careful. I'm adding some liquid glue to the back of that and then lining that up in the center of my card so I get a little bit of that Moonstone cardstock showing through, and that is going to tie back into the center with that tumbled glass. Then I'm going to take my two snowdrifts and I'm going to adhere the taller one down first. And I took this panel, these two snowdrift panels, all the way to the outside edge of the card just for something a little bit different. I thought it just made it look like, I don't know, like the snow was extra piled on there or something. And then I popped the shorter snowdrift up with some foam tape. And now I can start to adhere my images. I always like to start with the largest image first. So I'm going to attach the house and I'm going to put that on the second snowdrift so it's set back a little bit in the scene. And then while that glue is still wet, I'm going to add these little berry branches so that I can tuck them behind and have them kind of poking out from behind it. I just thought that would add a really pretty pop of color on either side. And I wanted those to be kind of symmetrical, but then just a little bit offset, so they're just tipped at slightly different angles, and that also just helps it look a little bit more realistic because nothing in nature grows completely perfect. Then I'm going to take my little mushroom and add that down toward the front of the house. And I've got this tiny little pine bough and I'm going to tuck that behind it just for a little I was going to say greenery, but it's not green. There's no green in this color palette, so I colored that one with some grays. Next, I'm going to start adding my fairies, and I'll be popping those up on some foam tape just to give them a little bit more focus and also raise them up to the same level as the smaller snowdrift. So I added my 2 flying fairies up in the sky, and then this third little one is going to go down to the left of the house, kind of balancing out that mushroom and the little pine bough. And then I'll add the little snowflake fairy wand into the hand of the one on the top right. And then I have this little gift that I'm going to add, and that's going to be over on the right hand side as well, kind of creating a little cluster with that mushroom. So I added that with some foam tape as well, just to give that some dimension. And then I have these little snowdrifts. So I'm going to add the biggest one to the top of the roof. And then there's this taller triangular shaped one. I put that above the door. And then there's a small triangle shaped one that could go on the chimney, but I figured the chimney was hot. So I decided to put it on the end of the little branch that's sticking out. And then I put this final one on the doorstep. And you know, if there's a card with fairies on there, there's got to be some sparkle, especially if it's winter fairies. So I'm adding some crystal stickles, and I'm going to put it all over the place. I'm going to add it to all of their wings, because of course their wings need to be sparkly. And then I also added it to their little scarves, and the fairy down below, I put it on her muffler. I also put it on the gift bow on the little gift, and to the white bottom edge of all of their skirts, and the fairy wand, and all of the little berries as well. And I just like to add it as a little touch. I don't cover up the entire colored image. I just like to put it in the shadowed areas. I also put it on the pine bough and all of the little snow drops as well. Because you just need a lot of sparkle. It's fairies and it's Christmas. So I also put it on the top edge of the snowdrifts just to tie all of that in, and that will make it so nice and sparkly because you've got that liquid stardust on the top there, and then all of that stickles everywhere else. So there's a look at how that catches the light, and another peek at the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe and ring that notification bell. All of that does so much to help out my channel. You can also leave me a comment down below. And if you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you'll find those listed and linked in the description bar below the video. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one of those to check them out. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.